We're going to take a quick ride through Strickland's career in Nashville, and my estimation of this man is he was the finest architect that ever worked in the state, and the Tennessee State Capitol building is the best thing he ever built. This is what Strickland looked like while he was working on the Capitol. He was born in Navesink, New Jersey in 1788, died here in Nashville in April of 1854. And he had planned for that eventuality because he asked the legislature if he could design 2 burial vaults within the walls of the Capitol building. And he got pride of place. He's over the cornerstone, and the building chairman is at the opposite end of the building. This is one of his first structures, of course, the Second Bank of the United States, 1818, up in Philadelphia. And it is showing where his heart lay with the Greek architecture. And of course, working with Nicholas Biddle, what's more Greek than the Parthenon? So that was his inspiration for the bank building. He also did the tower on Independence Hall. It wasn't there. He put it there in 1828. In 1832, he did the Merchants Exchange in Philadelphia, where for the first time he referenced the Choragic monument to Lysicrates in ancient Athens. He was also called upon to design the sarcophagus for George Washington at Mount Vernon. This was his inspiration for what he was going to put on his masterpiece, the Tennessee State Capitol. This is a plaster model of it in the Pushkin Museum in Moscow. It was popular throughout the European world. This is the model that Francis Strickland built of the Capitol Tower. It's in the State Museum collection. It's about 7 feet tall. And you can see the 4 legs that hold up all of the massive weight of that tower. This is the finished work. And some of the Philadelphia ironwork that's in the tower. This is wooden Perrott work, the spiral staircase. The top of the tower, however, is a local commission. The T.M. Brennan Works down at First and Broadway did this cast iron work, and it's about 18 feet high. This is the truss system inside the tower holding up the roof. And the truss system, the cast iron, that has been holding up the roof of the Capitol since the 1850s. It looks like a tinker toy or an erector set, but it still functions. He also did some cemetery monuments, and John Kane was one of the stone workers that worked on the Capitol building. And when he died, the other stone cutters asked Strickland to design a monument to him. So at City Cemetery, you see this monument. And on top of it, symbolically, you have a stonecutter's tools laid down for the last time because he's not coming back to work on the Capitol building. This is his inscription. And the other monument at the City Cemetery is the Sarah Walker marker. And you can see there's an eternal flame at the top and a lacrimal urn because her husband is just going to cry for eternity over the loss of his beautiful young wife. But you might notice at the bottom there, his name isn't on it. He found a younger woman and married her. This is the Polk tomb, his final monument here in Nashville. When President Polk died, Strickland was called upon by Sarah Polk to design a tomb at their home, Polk Place. And this would have stood at where the corner now is for 7th Avenue and Union Street. Unfortunately, Polk's descendants wanted money rather than fame, so they wanted to sell the house. They did, and the state disinterred the president and first lady and buried them with honors on the front lawn of the state capitol. It's the only capitol that has a president buried at its site. The other Strickland building in Nashville is the old First Presbyterian Church since 1954, the Downtown Presbyterian Church. And this was Strickland's first idea for it, Italianate. I go to church there, so I can talk about them. And I think they were hidebound Calvinists and Italian. Well, you know who's in Rome. We can't do Italian. So you notice it's twin towers with squares. Strickland remembered building this in Philadelphia, St. Stephen's, with octagonal towers in the Gothic style. So he played with the geometry. He kept the towers square at the bottom, put octagons on top. And if you think Catholic is not to your liking, let's go pagan. So he came up with Egyptian revival, and they took it. And I think the house you visited last night is one of the reasons why. Adelicia's first husband, who was the biggest human trafficker in America, he made all of his money by selling people, including into prostitution. So when he died, his widow, Adelicia, commissioned a local architect to design a mausoleum for them in the Egyptian style. A couple of years later, the First Presbyterian burns down. The mayor is a member of that congregation. His next door neighbor is Samuel Dold Morgan, who's the chairman of the building commission. They start kibitzing, and Morgan says, well, we've got this Philadelphia architect. Why don't you talk to him? Well, they did, and guess who got the commission? This, I think, was one of the inspirations. This is from Napoleon's description of Egypt. Notice the columns, the bases with the chevrons, the lotus capitals. You'll see that when you go to the church today. This is the interior of the building as it is now. In the 90s, I was working to try and incrementally stabilize the building, so we did a lot of work on it, probably in close to $2 million work. The last phase we did was restoring the ceiling. You're walking into the Egyptian desert. You see the windows outside with trees, and then you see the Egyptian sky, and you see Karnak, the hypostyle of the Great Hall of Columns at Karnak. These are some of the windows. This is his other building in Tennessee. Unfortunately, it burned in the 1880s, but it was the Wilson County Courthouse, again using that Karagic monument. And Mr. Strickland got his wish. He is buried in the Capitol. But you notice it claims that he died at the age of 64. He was shaven a few years off of his age. He actually was a little bit older than that. During the Civil War, the Tennessee Capitol was the first Southern capital to be conquered by the U.S. Army and under occupation. They put Parrott guns on the steps to the Capitol, and these guns on the east side could shoot a projectile all the way across the Cumberland River and shell the city of Edgefield if they needed to. I did a book back in the 1980s of about 350 1864 images by George Barnard of Nashville and Chattanooga, called it Cities Under the Gun. Literally, they were, because if the Confederate raiders got in too close, they would meet these Parrott guns. Notice those lamps, too. Those were 21 feet high. They were by Wooden Parrott. They were gas torchères. There were a pair of them at every entrance to the Capitol. And unfortunately, in the 1950s, the state architect thought they were just too old and damaged, and he threw them away. In the 80s, when I had lobbied to have the Capitol restored and the governor created a Capitol Commission and named me as an advisor to it, we looked into reproducing those. And in the 1980s, it was going to exceed $1 million. We didn't do it. One of the tales of the Capitol is that there was a gunfight on the staircase. There was not. If you actually go into the court records, what happened during Reconstruction is Tennessee passed the amendment making African Americans free, and then when it came to making them citizens and giving them voting rights, some of the members left to break the quorum and hid out from the governor. The sergeant-at-arms went out, arrested them. They imprisoned them in the committee rooms under the visitors' gallery in the House. He declared that was a legal quorum, and they voted, and Tennessee got to be a state again, and African Americans got citizenship. There was no gunfight, though. Mr. Morgan, the building chairman, is also buried in the building. He's in the south end. Also in that year, Nashville was celebrating its centennial, and the Tennessee Historical Society bought one of the Clark Mills castings of the equestrian bronze of Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans. And here the state militia is inside, opening Jackson like a clamshell, like Venus born of the foam. And there he is being celebrated. This is how it looked after about 4 years after the installation, with all those beautiful Victorian townhouses across the street. And a friend, her grandfather and great-grandfather were photographers in Nashville from the 1850s till about 1900. And I knew that Sarah had a huge cache of these Gears photographs in her attic and in drawers around the house. So when we started working on the Capitol, I got copies of these. This is the entrance to the Capitol. That's one of the original gasoliers. We used these photographs as a model to replicate all of the destroyed gasoliers on that floor. And there is a sign there that you can barely see that says, "Do not spit on the floor or the steps." And right down the middle of the hallway, there are spittoons at about 10-foot intervals. And this confirmed a English lady's visit to the Capitol 10 years after the war. Theresa Yelverton did a book called Terracina in America, and she talks about how slippery this Capitol floors were, and that's why. On the second floor, those Cornelius and Baker gasoliers are still in place. And you know, a hot southern day, you pray for a breeze. Do you notice the stabilization changed there so that it doesn't sway too wildly when you open all the doors and windows? And also they have airlocks on the doors, because how do you heat a room with a 42-foot ceiling? You don't. But you want to keep drafts out, so they have airlocks on the doors. There's also spittoons down the hallway there. This was the treasure of the Capitol. This was a gasolier on 3 levels with over 40 gas burners in it. On the tiers, up here, there are Indians and corn stalks. Up here, there are buffalo, and on the very top, there are tobacco plants. Corn, tobacco, and cotton were the chief crops of Tennessee, so they're celebrated in the gasolier. Native Americans were here until Jackson had the Indian Removal Act passed. And buffalo were native to the state, so it was a celebration of where we'd come from. The Capitol Commission even asked the Cornelius Company to look into Audubon's quadrupeds in McKinney and Hall's Native American plates so they could accurately portray those in the gasolier. In the 1880s, the Shelby County delegation, that's where Memphis is, was sitting under it, and it made them very nervous. They got their colleagues to vote to remove this beautiful gasolier. They hacked it to bits, and over the years, the State Museum has been given Native Americans, buffaloes, corn plants, tobacco plants. But we now have documentation through my friend Sarah of what it looked like, and hopefully someday we can reproduce that. This is another view of it where you can see more clearly the Indians, corn stalks, buffaloes. The library was the most beautiful room for most visitors in the Capitol, and it is not a Strickland room. When he died in 1854, the state commissioned his son, Francis Strickland, to succeed him, and he worked from his father's plans until about 1857, and then to save money, they fired him. They worked from his plans for a while, and then they hired an Englishman in Nashville, Harvey Ackroyd, to finish the building with the State Library Chamber. Notice the curtain on the staircase there. That's so that you cannot see the librarian's ankles as she's going up the staircase, young man. This was the headquarters for the Tennessee Historical Society. And so the case there with Mississippian artifacts and the portraits are all from the Historical Society collection. And you can see they've unframed the governor's portraits so they could squeeze more of them in there and hang them off the railings in the room. This is the House Chamber. Look at those columns. The columns are one single piece of limestone from the Capitol through the shaft to the base. This is in a period when they're still using the same engineering techniques that Pericles used to build ancient Athens. They don't have steam hoists. They don't have compressed air drills or anything. You're doing it by hand with slave labor and convict labor at the penitentiary. And you've leased land out that way, and they've done it 16 times perfectly. Like at Luxor, where the biggest obelisk in the world lies still in the quarry because it cracked while they were making it. They did it 16 times perfectly here in this building. The visitor's rail at the back is something that I had hoped we could put back in there because there's no ADA handicapped access for either the House or the Senate chamber. You simply can't go in if you're handicapped. But they had a solution to that in the 19th century. The members sat up around the speaker, and that left room at the back so that the public could come into the chamber. This is the Senate. These are the original desks that you see there that were made in the 1850s for the chamber. They've taken the globes off the gasolier, but the gasolier survives in that chamber. By the 1950s, the Capitol building was severely deteriorating because they were using local limestone, and it's severely flawed with other things in it. So by the 1950s, pieces of the building were falling off, so they shut it down. They removed a lot of the ironwork and the the stonework to the building. You can see where the ceilings had severe leaks in them as well. And in the 1950s, they had used the Tennessee State Capitol as a site for the Disney Studios' Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier. As a kid, I had a Crockett outfit because I loved Walt Disney and I loved Fess Parker's Davy Crockett. You can see the marble rostrums there. Those were in there for over 100 years until the state destroyed them so they could build larger wooden ones with all their new electronic gizmos in them. We had hoped when I had lobbied for the restoration that we would simply clad those wooden ones in marble, but that did not come to pass either. Here you can see them removing pieces of the Capitol, stacking them up, taking down all of the pediments, getting new Indiana Big B limestone carved to exactly copy the original in a much firmer stone. At the side entrance to the Capitol, originally there was a staircase with a fountain. The fountain in the middle there is now at the Polcombe down in Columbia. And Ford Motor liked to show that Ford cars are really tough. So one of the local distributors here drove a chassis up that staircase into the Capitol, through the Capitol, and down the back side of the Capitol to show Ford can do it. And this is a funeral that was in the Capitol for William Brimage Bate. He was a Confederate general, he was a governor of Tennessee, and he was a United States senator, and he laid in state in the Capitol. And these are people waiting for the coffin to be removed from the Capitol building. In 1959, they created a tunnel into the Capitol. You can see Edward Ward Carmack's statue up there. He was a advocate of prohibition. And the tunnel was the idea of the Motlow family. The Women's Christian Temperance Union put up Carmack's statue because he was killed in a gunfight at 7th and Union downtown. He was talking to a lady, and one of the other newspaper editors in town, he edited the Tennessean, the editor of the American, saw him. They had had nasty words in print and in person. Carmack, fearing that Cooper had a gun, stepped into the street, pulled out his gun, and shot Robin Cooper twice, once through his sleeve and once into him. Robin was a better shot. He pulled out a gun and shot Carmack. He fell a dead heap in the gutter, and they were both indicted on premeditated murder charges. So the Motlow Tunnel was put up in honor of the owners of Jack Daniel's Distillery. So you have a whiskey baron undermining a prohibitionist at the side entrance to our state capitol. And that's how you'll go into the building today. Back in the 80s, we were hoping that we could restore at least one of the courtrooms that was in the building, and the Supreme Court chamber was our target. So Governor Alexander moved his whole press office down into the basement, and that left only the Secretary of State. And he said, well, if you find me more room on this floor, I'll move too, and we did. So we started demolition. We hoped that the original stone columns were still in there. There I am checking them out, and they were. Those are the original limestone columns. In the corner there had been a fireplace. They could get a little heat in that room. And I knew of one drawing in the Strickland portfolio at the Library and Archives, so we used it as the template for that marble fireplace. Two of the lights in there are a matched pair by Cornelius. They're from the same period as the Capitol, the same manufacturer who was hired to illuminate the whole building, so we got a lucky deal there. The one in the middle is by a different manufacturer, though. And this is what the finished courtroom looked like. The House and Senate, they were smoking like chimneys, so we decided we're not going to waste taxpayer money and get everything all gummed up with tar and nicotine as long as they're smoking. So school children would come in there and go, you're damaging my health. And they shamed the legislature into banning smoking in their chambers. So we finally got to do those rooms as well. But it was pretty garish. It was from the 1950s. They took out the original wood and plaster gilded cornices, and they put these things fastened back into the window well rather than hanging outside the window. And we've addressed that. This was the proposal. And we knew what the carpeting looked like because there was a portrait of Governor standing on it, in fact. The Senate chamber with its original gasolier, and the proposed restoration, which we didn't get to do the marble. The governor's reception room. The murals in there were done during the WPA period. Donald Davidson designed them, and an Armenian-American, Gerard Zorthian, painted them. When we were working on the building back in the 1980s, he wandered into the construction site, 90-something years old, and was inspecting his murals, and he thought they were still holding up pretty well. This is what had been designed when they were remodeling the Capitol. They chopped up the old state archives and part of the Secretary of State's office to make a whole suite in a quarter of the building as the governor's suite. This was to be his cabinet room. The library, though, look at that ceiling. Look at the ironwork. The medallions up there in the upper tier are interesting. There was a story that got bandied about that we asked for Tennessee faces to be added there. It's even better than that. I knew that the Wetter House in Savannah, Georgia predated the Capitol, and that it had that same balcony iron railing all the way around the house, and that when the house was demolished in the 1950s, the Historic Savannah Foundation had saved them. And I had read that they were somewhere on Chippewa Square. So when Mills Lane and I finished his last book on Southern architecture, Kentucky and Tennessee, he let me use his house in Savannah, and I walked over to Chippewa. There were those railings with the Tennessee faces, which meant that the whole nation knew how important Tennessee was, because we got 5 of us all over the country. Anybody that ordered it got us. It wasn't just Tennessee that did a special order. And there's the ceiling. One of the original gasoliers. The fan vault there is trompe l'oeil. That is plaster that is painted to look like it is stone. And the groin vault is stone painted to look like it's plaster. This is my favorite angle. When you're in there, stop on the staircase, turn around, and you can see both floors and 2 Cornelius gasoliers. And as you're going up there on the right, as you pivot, one of my favorite things about that landing is after 170 years of people pivoting on the ball of their foot, there's a bowl worn into the stonework there. We also were able, finally, when they stopped smoking, to do a test cleaning to get all the tar and nicotine out in the House and Senate chambers. And you can see what a mess it was. And we also found where the fireplaces had been filled in the Senate chamber. And one of the final things I got to do in the Senate was I reminded them that somebody went paint happy and painted out all of the original marble. So let's strip it back and expose the marble there in the railing to the Senate chamber. And here they are working on that and cleaning all of the tar and nicotine out of the House chamber, cleaning the stone on the columns, and we now celebrate a nicely restored 3 times Tennessee State Capitol.